Hi, this is Professor JPS, and excuse me. This is this is Professor JPS, and this is a lecture for Communication Arts 205, Mass Media and Pop Culture. This is essentially a review, or what you might call a pre-review, for the final examination, which is coming up. It's coming up in May. What is the date? I forgot my syllabus here. Sorry. It's coming up soon. We have class tomorrow, which would have been class for tomorrow, 427. And we have on Wednesday, we have class presentations, and the Monday next week, we have class presentations, and the Wednesday after that, we have class presentations. So if you look at your syllabus, you'll see when the class presentations are supposed to be. So just a few of you have volunteered that you'll do some class presentations soon. Please do them in the same exact way you did them last time. In the last email I had given you, I had given some rationales for class presentations. And so you could do anything from chapter 4, sociological analysis, which deals with the 4 social sciences, also deals with postmodernism, which was, a fairly lengthy part of our particular chapter. And what was the last part? Sorry. Uses and gratifications. There were many uses and gratifications models that you could discuss. Okay, so and you could also do anything from the other chapters that we had done in this section. Chapter 8, the Maiden and the Snake advertisement. If you wanted to deconstruct an ad like was done in that particular chapter, you could do that. Or anything to do with video games that applies some of our media that we discussed. Some of our theories that we discussed. So you may remember in the video game chapter, there was problems in terms of video games with physical problems, sexual problems, and ideas of school violence. You could do something like that. Or chapter 11, cell phone, social media, and problem and identity. There was semiotics in there, there was Marxism in there, and so forth. It's really up to you to figure out which you'd like to do. But the class presentations are starting Wednesday, a week from now, Monday, and a week from this Wednesday, the next 3 sections. So what I'm going to do for some of these lectures is I'm just going to do some reviewing for the final examination. So tonight, it'll be a relatively short lecture, which would have been tomorrow's lecture and review. And I'm just going to go over some aspects of chapter 4 to reinvigorate some of the things we've been doing in these video lectures, okay? So you may remember chapter 4 was dealing with sociological analysis. And the one key thing I want to show you again is the core concepts and processes for the social sciences. It's right there at the bottom of that particular page. If you get a sense of what this means and the 4 core social sciences and what it is that they do, that'll be helpful for you for a relatively short question on the final examination. So just to go over that again, you have the 4 core concepts: sociology, psychology, political science, and anthropology. And the information within this particular graph, within this particular box, if you like, is describing the core concept for each of those and the process for each of those. And the core concept for sociology are groups and institutions. Groups and institutions, right? And the process is quite obviously socialization. Okay. The core concepts for psychology is the psyche or consciousness, and we discussed that before we even shut down NCC. The psyche and consciousness, what it is that we're aware of. And obviously, the core process is identification, how it is we identify. For political science, the core concept is power and government, and socialization is indoctrination, okay? How it is that we become indoctrinated into a particular kind of society, okay? I mean, you think about, all through elementary school, you pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, that you were becoming indoctrinated into American values and American systems. I'm not saying that's wrong or bad. I'm just saying that's an idea of indoctrination. You're indoctrinated into religious beliefs, in your particular church or synagogue or mosque, whatever. You're indoctrinated into particular kinds of cliques in high school, the way to think about things, right? Indoctrination is a way in which you're sort of becoming accustomed to a particular group or society. And anthropology, the core concept is culture, which is a whole way of life. And the process is enculturation, okay? Enculturation, how it is to become acculturated into a particular kind of society. This is real basic framework for understanding the rest of the stuff in chapter 4. Another key concept in chapter 4 has to do with the very lengthy description of the uses and gratifications research methods. Pages 164 all the way through pages 171. 164 all the way to 171. We discussed this a few weeks back, right here on this YouTube channel. And the uses and gratifications research methods is pretty basic to understand, right? You have all of this media out there. You have television, film, and radio, and billboards, and magazines, and newspapers, and the tremendous level of interest on something called the internet or social media or digital media. Our entire popular culture and our whole way of life is heavily mediated, right? Heavily related within a media landscape. And a uses and gratifications research methods analysis is just relatively smart people who are interested in what the use is for particular groups who are using media and how they're gratified by that use. In other words, why do you use this part of the media, let's say video games, or let's say social media, or let's say, watching films, and what do you get out of that? How are you gratified? And for what reasons are you gratified? And uses and gratification research analysis tries to understand what people are doing with all of their media and how it is that it affects them on a day-to-day basis, how it is that it affects their ideas of themselves and their own identities. And we went through this a couple weeks ago, but that information can be just double-checked on pages 165 through 171. In fact, there's a tremendously long list that I think I read to you before in all of those uses and gratification research methods, okay? So let's just go over a few of them and to get a sense of how it is that we understand them. To be amused is one. To see authority figures exalted or deflated is another. To experience the beautiful, to share experience with others, to satisfy curiosity and to be informed, to identify with a deity or a divine plan, to find distraction and diversion, to experience empathy, right? And it goes on and on and on with any of those, okay? The basic idea of uses and gratifications methods is to look into what people get out of their mass media. Now, in terms of your class presentations, you can think about any of these. You can think about, oh, I don't know, if you're like a horror film person and you really like horror movies, you could do to experience in a guilt-free and controlled situation extreme emotions such as love and hate, the horrible, the terrible, and similar phenomenon in terms of uses and gratifications. You could say that uses and gratification researchers will say, why do you like to see horror films? What do you get out of them? Is it because it's a kind of vicarious thrill that you know you can't do that in real life? Or first-person shooter games? I mean, you know, when you think about how powerful first-person shooter games are, why are they that powerful? I mean, what about the idea of putting a gun in our hands and trying to kill 50 people in a video game? Why would that be so popular, right? It's so popular because it's tapping into something, into our own particular psyche. You can think about that from a psychological point of view, or also research methods of uses and gratifications. There's all kinds of different choices you could make in terms of your class presentation. But uses and gratifications methods is just a many litany of ways to try to understand what it is that we get out of our very, very pervasive use of mass media. That's essentially what it means, okay? Excuse me. The other key element in this particular chapter has to do with something called postmodernism. Postmodernism, which is discussed on page 152 and 153 and a little bit of 154, okay? Now, the textbook definition of postmodernism is not bad, and they give a couple of decent examples. But you may remember from a couple weeks ago when I had first talked about postmodernism, I had deviated a little bit in discussing postmodernism from what is in the textbook, okay? So let me just kind of do that again this evening and try to get a sense that, try to explain this in a very, very basic way, because postmodernism is a relatively thought-provoking subject that requires some patience and some, in all frankness, a little bit of sophistication on all of our parts to get it right. The basic thoughts about postmodernism have to be first discussed with the very idea of art or aesthetics. Okay? Now, this is a course in mass media and popular culture. In order to have a sort of working understanding of art and aesthetics, I just want to do the real basics, right? Let's just say in the 1500s to about the 1900s. The 1500s to about the 1900s in Western art, that is to say, anything from Greece west through the United States. I don't know too much about Asian art or Eastern art or anything like that. But the basic impulse in art, let's say literature or painting or theater or sculpture or architecture or poetry, anything dealing with the humanities, the arts, the basic impulse, the basic duty of the artist in that time period, from the beginnings of the Renaissance until the 1900s, roughly speaking. I mean, I'm roughly speaking here. The impulse in art, for the most part, was for clarity, was for unity, was for an idealized form of beauty. So that anyone who saw that art, anyone who listened to that music, anyone who saw those plays, anyone who saw or even touched the piece of sculpture, anyone who ingested, absorbed that art, could absorb it in a recognizable way that was an idealized form, that was prettier than pretty, that was real, that was recognizable, right? that the music you heard in classical music was resonant and beautiful to listen to, that the literature that you were reading was understandable and powerful and emotional and a good story, a sad story, a happy story, a funny story, right? Whatever, but it was able to be understood and stayed with you. That a painting represented the thing in the world that it was trying to represent. A picture of a beautiful meadow, or a picture of a painting of a beautiful woman, or a painting of a child or something. That the audience and the artist could bring real life and beauty and unity and clarity to their impulse in art. Okay? That the poet wrote about love or wrote about loss in a way that was maybe a little tricky, but ultimately understandable and beautiful to speak and beautiful to feel. Okay? So in pre-modern art, you had a real feeling for clarity and unity and beauty. Okay? Now, maybe you had to be taught some stuff along the way in art history classes or theater classes, but in general, it was a representation of the world that was idealized, right? Like when Michelangelo makes a sculpture of a man from the Bible called David. His David is beautiful. He's got like big guns and he's handsome and has this beautiful straight nose and beautiful curly hair. It's an idealized version of this biblical figure. And when people see it, they recognize it as something valuable and pretty and idealized and beautiful, right? And when, you know, Michelangelo painted the Leonardo da Vinci painted the Last Supper, it was a beautiful image of Christ and the 12 apostles, and it was recognizable, and it was beautiful and linear and perfectly understood, and right? So you see what I mean. Anyway, around the beginning of the 20th century, let's say roughly speaking 1900 to about 1960 or so, 1970 or so, pre-modern art becomes eclipsed with what's called modernism or modern art. And it's not just paintings, it's all of the arts. In other words, the unity and beauty of pre-modern art, the clarity, the strive for recognizability and beauty is broken in modernism. Modernism shatters this idea that art has to be beautiful, that art has to be recognizable. And modern art is intellectualized. Modern art is sometimes the opposite of what pre-modern art is. Modern art says we no longer need to represent the world as it is. We can represent the world in an intellectual or more abstract way. So then you have paintings that don't look like they make sense when you look at them. Like Picasso was a master painter, and he could do realistic depictions of life or people or whatever. But then he started to change his people to reflect some inner psychological sensibility to his art. And his majestic paintings are not recognizable immediately, but they get to some more inner beauty, and they get to some idea about intellectualizing the idea of beauty, right? Some classical music goes from being resonant to be sounding pretty to dissonant, almost sounding too harsh for a purpose to talk about a harsh world or whatever. Poetry becomes more intellectualized, more abstract. Some literature becomes even harder to follow. But it's writing within the idea of writing and representation within the idea of representation. Modern art is more abstract. It's more intellectualized. It says we don't need to represent the world as it was anymore. We've changed. That kind of thinking has been played out, so to speak. And modernism is much different in terms of how it represents the world with arts. Okay? Postmodernism is a combination of those two impulses. Postmodernism is bringing in something from the past that's recognizable and easily understood, and then places in with something that's a bit more modern, to have like a kind of break with modern impulses. And it's bringing back, almost in a retro style, an impulse that we kind of have some connection to, some remembrance of, to combine them. And I've mentioned this on several occasions. I think one of the easiest ways to make these connections is to think about sampling in hip-hop music as a postmodern impulse. Sampling in hip-hop music is definitely a postmodern sensibility. Because what is a sample? A sample is a small bit of another song. Not just any song, though. 9 times out of 10, a sampled bit of in a rap song, the sample is something that was from the past that the contemporary audience will recognize and wonder about its new use in a new song, a new track, a new laydown of a beat. So again, I go back to the old, which is a pretty old example now, but Jay-Z's Hard Knock Life, where he has his own version of Hard Knock Life that he wants to talk about in his music, but he borrows from the past the song from Annie, the play. Excuse me. Annie, the play, where the children are singing It's a Hard Knock Life from a musical from the 1970s, which itself is based on a comic strip from the 1920s and 30s. Then it became a movie in the 1970s, and then another movie in the 80s, and another movie in the 2000s, and then yet another movie in 2018 or whatever it was. That's an ongoing textual life of Little Orphan Annie. But Jay-Z's use of it is something that's recognizable from childhood that people will remember, and then he plants it to his modern version of his own beats, and he has a kind of collection, right? It's like modern impulse and pre-modern impulse and modern impulse are broken up, and postmodernism is you're playing with the two broken up pieces. Okay, I had given you an example of the Philip Johnson's AT&T Tower in New York City. The whole tower goes all the way up like this, goes high into the sky, and it's a very, very modern building. Modern meaning 20th century look to it. It's pretty plain, and it's the modern architects, sterile, very little personality, utilitarian, very functional. And at the very top is this big 19th century bow that goes across the top of the building. The idea that he would combine a 19th century idea with a 20th century idea is a postmodern impulse. He's putting together two completely different styles in one building. And the world was wowed by his guts to do something like that. That's a postmodern impulse because he's pulling this classical thing from the past and placing it into what was then modern architecture. Quentin Tarantino is the epitome of a postmodern filmmaker. Tarantino is all about style. Style, style, style. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not a criticism. I think he's a terrific stylist. But virtually all his movie characters, at least the most memorable ones, they have nothing to do with reality at all, right? I mean, they're just a kind of collection of movie caricatures from the past, gangsters or senseis or sword warriors, or a very, very cool slave who's trying to murder his slave captors. Someone who's trying to, a whole regiment of Jewish soldiers trying to take down Hitler. Like none of his movies have anything to do with reality, but that's okay. But the films are based on movie caricatures from the past that are then placed in Tarantino's crazy world, crazy stylistic world, that it's all on a superficial level. There's very little emotion in Tarantino's movies. I mean, there's some, but very little. And again, that's not a criticism. What I'm saying is his movies are not based in any kind of reality. I mean, like the Inglourious Basterds film, I mean, that's not how Hitler died. I mean, he doesn't care about that, right? I mean, even this last one, the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, is so crazy in how it takes a real life story and completely bends it around the corner where Sharon Tate actually lives at the end of the movie. But he's not concerned with that. He's concerned with how he would right the wrongs of that horrible night in August of 1969. He's interested in always having a kind of framework, a generic framework from the past that he then changes, right? I mean, right from the beginning of his career, his movies have been postmodern. They've been a kind of feeling of old film caricatures being placed in his crazy universe that he writes about and he films. Okay? Tarantino was very much a postmodern filmmaker. The key idea with postmodernism is borrowing from the past to stir up the present, whether it's in film or music or architecture or whatever. Postmodernism is a very powerful force and has been for the better part of 40 years or so in American filmmaking and American media. There's always a kind of retro feeling that's ready to be banked on, but also to change generic, that is to say, genre representations, to breathe new life into them. And that's postmodern sensibility, okay? So, this is what we're doing. Let me just, give me 2 seconds. Let me look at a calendar. So, this is, well, it's technically the 27th. It's after midnight on Sunday, the 26th. So, we would have this lecture essentially tomorrow if we were still going to NCC, the 27th, Monday the 27th. So the 29th, the 4th, and the 6th are class presentations. So, you know, I've heard from some of you, the go-getters who want to get this out of the way, you have to have a presentation for me by the 6th. I'm just going to say it that way. By May 6th, you have to have a 3.5-minute class presentation sent to me in a YouTube, send me the YouTube link, okay? And keep in touch with me over these next 2 weeks. It's very, very important. And the final exam will be probably the 11th. I'll probably send it out on the 11th, and it'll probably be due at the end of that week, like the 16th or 17th or something. Okay? All final grades have to be in by the 20th. That doesn't mean you have till the 20th. You will not have till the 20th. That won't give me enough time to grade everything. I'm teaching 5 classes. Okay? But for our class work here, what I'm essentially going to do is I'm going to go over what's on the final exam in the next 3 lectures. So for tonight, what I've given you is essentially the first 3 questions of the exam, more or less, right? And then for Wednesday's lecture, which I'll do Tuesday night, I will go over the next 3 questions that have to do with the next chapter. And then this time next week, for Monday the 4th, I will go over the next 3 questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then for the Wednesday the 6th, I will finish the next 3 questions. Okay? So each lecture will be a mini review for the final examination, which I'll probably send out the final examination 2 weeks from tonight on May 11th, right after Mother's Day. And it'll be 12 questions. 12 questions, just like the first exam, with 5, 10, and 15-point questions. Okay? 5, 10, and 15-point questions. All right? The other thing is, you know, I'm not sure where your mind space is, but it's really important that we at least get you to understand that we need you to try to pre-register for classes for the fall semester. Now, a number of you may be somewhat close to graduating. I'm not exactly sure, It's hard to know. I don't see you in the classroom. I've been saying this in just about every email and every video lecture lately, that we have to try to pre-reg. I can help you to do this, but ultimately you have to do this online yourselves with your credit cards and your financial aid packages and so forth. I can only say, please make sure you're looking at your emails, not just from me, but your other professors and also the school itself. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I think you have the choice to take all the classes pass fail. And if you do end up choosing pass fail, you may not get all the credits if you take a pass fail. Or I forget exactly. I still think they're still working on it. But I'm going to grade you the normal way I grade you, with some leniency because it's a national emergency, international emergency. But in general, I've been kind of surprised that, I don't know about your class specifically, but in general, my 5 classes, given that you're able to do this work at home and kind of look things up on your own and more or less listen to what I have to say in my lectures and just stop, pause, write it down, and then put it in the exams, I'm a little surprised that more students aren't doing better on the exams than they could. I don't know. I'm a little surprised. I thought maybe if you were doing all these things at home that you would just be able to look things up pretty easily. But it's more or less people are getting there. People who got A's are getting A's, and the people who got B's are getting B's, and the people who got C's are getting C's, and the people who got D's are getting D's. So I don't know. It's up to you guys, but I know these are unprecedented times. But let me just go over this one more time for this particular class, COM 205, Mass Media Popular Culture, Monday and Wednesdays, 11:30 to 12:50. We're essentially finished with the material. Tonight, I just went over 3 parts of what will be the final exam, okay? The 4 core concepts in social sciences, uses and gratifications theory, and postmodernism. Starting Wednesday, people can do their class presentations. 3.5 minutes in a YouTube link sent to me, okay? Please make sure that you have your class presentations to me by May 6th. If you don't have them to me by May 6th, they'll be considered late. So just send them to me as you do, as you will. Class presentations, 3.5 minutes, and send the link to me, the YouTube link in an email. It has to be from the chapters we discussed earlier in this particular lecture. On Wednesday, I will do the next part of the examination, and on next Monday, I will do the next part of the examination, and on next Wednesday, the Wednesday after that, I will do the last part of the examination. I will go over all these things, what pages to look for, and what ideas to kind of ruminate and think about in your head. The final exam will be given out, I think, sometime before May 11th, and you'll probably have the rest of that week or so to get it back to me, okay? Please think about pre-registration for the fall, or even the summer, if you're interested. Now, all summer classes are online. I, in fact, have to learn how to use Blackboard. I've never used it. I never bothered with it. I didn't want to. I miss the classroom. Boy, do I miss the classroom. But if you're interested, I am teaching a summer film studies course, Communication Arts 256, focus on the director. I'm not exactly sure how we're going to do that all online. I think my students will have to find the films on their own, or maybe Amazon or Netflix or some other ways. I know that's difficult. It may not be the right time to try to take a class, but if you're interested, I'm going to be doing it. And, it's at least I'm going to try to do it. I have to get enough enrolled to do it, but I have a feeling it's not going to go, but it might, who knows? But I really have to really remind you guys that I don't know what your lives are like right now or what you're thinking about, but because I just can't sign a form and have you run down the records, you're going to have to look to see what classes you may be interested in taking, look to see what classes you may think you need to take, And I'd like for us to start talking about that sooner rather than later, because once all the exams come in with my 5 classes, I'm going to have about 10 million emails to get through. So like, even if you finish your exam and you go, okay, Shields, I need to know what classes I need right now. Like, I won't be able to do that for you. So please just take a look at your own transcripts. Please just take a look at your own degree evaluations. Please just take a look at what your financial aid situation is like for the fall. Okay, because we have to have decent numbers for the fall. And it's my sincere hope that we're back in the classroom in the fall, but I just don't know. I don't think anybody knows. And also, make sure that you're thinking about what courses you want to take. Now, in terms of communication arts, I'm teaching 2 film studies courses. I'm teaching COM 157, which is American film, on Tuesdays only. We watch movies, I talk, we go over the films. It's good. I'm also teaching another film course on Thursdays, a separate film course altogether. It's the same one I'm offering in the summer, COM 256. If it doesn't, they're being offered both summer and fall. So if you don't want to take it in the summer, take it in the fall. It's COM 256, Focus on the Directors. It's a 200-level communications course. And it's famous filmmakers for over the years, okay? No textbook for that course. In fact, no textbook for the other film course either. I hope I can get in and get my readings. At any rate, that's what I'm teaching besides Communication Arts 101, which I always teach. And then in terms of communication arts, there's journalism that's being offered. There's media writing, which is kind of a journalism course. And there's also what's her name? Digital journalism, which is also being offered. Plus, the film and television production courses that are being offered. Okay, so that's, and I think I told you before, for some screw up, it only says staff for all the faculty slots right now up on banner, but that'll be changed sooner or later. Okay, and I'm teaching the film courses, and the regular people are teaching the other courses. So just keep that in mind. But you might need to understand what courses you need for liberal arts, or what courses you need for math or science or whatever. And the sooner you do it, the easier it'll be, because it could take a little while doing all this stuff online. Okay, so I don't know what your lives are like right now. I don't know what the economic impact is on you and your families. I don't know if some of the students I haven't heard from have been sick. I'm not sure. But it's nearly May. We're nearly done for the semester. So just please think about the fall. It's really important for all of our sakes, for the school's sake, for your sake, for my sake, that we have a sense of what's happening for the fall semester. Even if it's all online, which I hope it's not, but we shall see. Keep all your classmates in your thoughts and prayers if you're so prayer-minded. There have been some, I don't mean COM 205 necessarily, I just mean NCC folks in general. There have been cases, some serious cases, so just keep that in mind. And please be safe. But please just do me a favor, send me an email saying you're getting this information, okay? And just when you send me the email, say, hey, Shields, it's Jane Smith, COM 205, getting the lectures, getting the emails, thanks. Or Joe Smith, COM 205. Please identify yourselves. When you don't identify yourselves, I have to go through all my files to find out who I'm talking about. Now, most of you I know by name, but sometimes I forget what classes are in. I'm teaching over 100 students, 5 classes. Okay, so that's the end of it for this evening. I'll have a lecture ready for Wednesday evening, where we'll go over the next chapter, talk more about the class presentations. Thank you. Stay safe.